All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for indulging my musical tastes just for a few minutes. I'm really excited to have everybody here. We're going to get started. We have a good number of folks who've registered to join us. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Matt Gonzalez. I'm director of the Education, Justice, Research, and Organizing Collaborative, and we're at the NYU Metro Center. I'm really excited to be here with our colleagues from New York Appleseed, who will introduce themselves in a few minutes, and our friends and colleagues from WXY to present our to be released report from Crest to Valleys and New York City's battles for integration 70 years after the Brown decision. So as many of you may know, but if you don't know, now you know that we're upcoming on Friday. Actually, will be the 70-year anniversary of the historic Brown versus Board decision that was supposed to have outlawed segregation across America, right? And so what we felt like it was important to do was to commemorate this moment, and us at the NYU Metro Center have had a number of events and leading up to our upcoming equity conference this Friday to commemorate this moment, to commemorate the years of work that have been done by many people in this room and outside of this room to achieve the promise of Brown. And so we're excited to take a look at New York City and the progress that has been made. I'm going to pass it over to my friend and colleague Nyah to get us kicked off. Oh, really quickly, sorry, before we do that, as you all know, this is a webinar, and so there will be a space for a question and answer section. So on your screens, you should have an opportunity to ask questions. And if you have any issues, please reach out to us in the chat, and we'll make sure that we clarify the process for answering any questions that may arise. So we're looking forward to engaging with you all and sharing our findings, and I'll pass it to Nyah.
Thank you, Matt. Everyone, my name is Nyah Berg, pronouns she, her. I am the executive director at New York Appleseed. We have been honored and humbled to be able to join Matt and his team at NYU Metro Center for this report. But to lay some context down before we go into some of the findings and narratives there of what is in the report, we want to also tell you why. Why did we decide to come together to write this for the 70th anniversary of Brown outside of the obvious of commemorating the 70th anniversary? And I think for one, we've really sat with the question for some time that we have addressed, and we know we've known since 2012 what the state of segregation is in New York City. Well, what about the state of integration in New York City? What does it look like to look at a asset-based thinking of, okay, well, what have we done? Because as we know, really quickly in 2012, New York Times put out an article calling New York City one of the most segregated school systems in the country. This was in combination with a 2014 UCLA report that called New York State the most segregated school system in the country for Black students, and New York City one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And that's been reaffirmed in 2021 when they looked at data, and still New York City was 70% of New York City schools were intensely segregated. And so we know all of this, and we say it time and time again to make sure that people don't forget. But what I think some folks may forget is the incremental progress. And so if I take a look at where we are as far as progress, next slide. Cool. Awesome. Give you some insights into what we had in the report. So again, New York City seems to be entering a new chapter in the movement for integration. We felt this for some time, both in the aftermath of COVID-19, but also with a lot of other shifts in policy. And this shift requires transparency and accountability. And so this report offers both narrative, research, data up to our current moment on how we can think about having transparency and where we are with integration, but also how we can hold our systems accountable to continue to move forward. And so within the report, we have a timeline of the modern movement for integration, taking stock of both as people, but as programs and initiatives, how we've been in integration spaces and ways that they've moved forward. taking stock of the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think a lot of us have been doing that. We've been taking a look at, from where learning and curriculum is, what has been the impact of COVID-19. We really wanted to analyze what the impact might have been on integration, celebrate incremental progress, and also just have a reminder of the goals and laws and promises that have been made to our community, including, for example, a law called Local Law 225 from 2019 that is supposed to go into place by the end of this year, that says every school district should have a diversity working group by the end of 2024. So we kind of brought all these things together in a report, so we have multiple, both transparency and accountability and ways to move forward. And with that, I'm going to transfer over to talking a little bit about where we are, what our successes are for New York City. As of 2024, there are 212 schools that have participated in the diversity and admissions program that started with one school in 2013. Pretty impressive to see the growth there, but also a need to continue to watch that growth and also look at the DIA program. 13 community school districts have received grants from the New York State Education Department, part of their NYCIP grant. By 2020, it's 6 of those, I believe 6, that would receive over $2 million as part of the final phase of that grant. We've also had some city money thrown at diversity planning. Most famously, probably the District 15 Diversity Plan was part of sort of kicking off city diversity grants for another 5 school districts. And then we also have different successes in ways that we have dismantled levers of segregation in the city. So the gifted and talented admissions test that was extremely segregated was eliminated. We are no longer testing 4-year-olds for admission to gifted and talented programs. The use of screens at middle schools has been dramatically reduced. However, we still keep a keen eye on making sure that they don't continue to proliferate and build back up. Thanks to some reversals in policies, which our report goes into a little bit more in detail. But we've had district diversity plans. We've had high school admissions focus on transparency and fairness and inclusivity, getting rid of selection criteria for admissions, such as looking at attendance. And then the permanent elimination of district geographic priority was another one that was a incredibly segregative lever for segregation in New York City schools, particularly in District 2. But we also know that we are fighting for that to not be reversed right now. But those are some of the successes very quickly outlined of like where we are in the city as far as incremental progress. But as I sort of mentioned, with some of those incremental wins, we're also working on challenges. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt to talk a little bit about what we're facing currently.
Thanks, Nyah. And I get to talk about all the fun stuff that's happening in the city. So yeah, thanks to Nyah for really laying out some of the kind of progress and success that has been kind of moved in the last 10 years in New York City. And I think it's really important to just note that, when I got involved in this work over 10 years ago, there were 0 districts with integration plans. There was 1 school with an integration plan, and so while it's taken a long time, there has been some incremental progress that I think is worth noting, right? And part of what has stalled the progress, right? There's about 200 schools, as Nyah said, who are participating in diversity and admissions programs. There's about 1,800 schools in New York City, right? So we are certainly on the lower end of progress. And so when we think about the challenges that have kind of slowed the role of integration, one of the main levers, right, and many people on this call, many people understand that significant interruptions, not just to policies related to integration and desegregation, but many progressive policies that we're kind of looking at the erosion of right now, really can be traced back to the structure of school governance that we have in New York City, which is called mayoral control, right? And this places a tremendous amount of power in the hands of a single individual, our mayor, currently Mayor Eric Adams, who then places that power in the hands of the chancellor, right? And so most places in the country have elected school boards. This is not to suggest that elected school boards are the be all end all of progress, but they certainly operate more democratically than our current system, right? And so when we reflect on the disruptions or slow walking of progress under the de Blasio administration, much of that really comes down to the amount of power and control that we've given to the mayor, right? And so that's really a thread, I think, that'll run through much of this conversation and much of the themes that are uplifted in our report, right? And then more specifically, right, and Nyah actually has played a huge role. Nyah and New York Appleseed really have played a huge role in really trying to simplify and clarify the high school admissions process, right? So many people may know that process has, there's about 700 programs, there's hundreds of schools, and the process of choosing high schools in New York City is, possibly more complicated than choosing college and getting into college at so-called elite universities, right? So there have been a number of efforts to simplify the process, to clarify the process, but we still know that there have been changes that make the pool of students who receive their first priority, right? So students rank their high schools in New York City. So what we understand is that the number of students receiving their first choices for schools continues to decline, right? And so we understand that young people don't have as much access as to the most sought after or the most well-resourced and supported high schools as students who obtain more privilege in New York City. And another kind of underlying thread, right, related to mayoral control is that, since Eric Adams has become the mayor of New York City, there has been a persistent effort multiple times each year to cut the budget for schools. And so we are still fighting for like the basic needs of each school now, which I think disrupts and moves us away from some of the more progressive policy ideas and changes that our system deserves, really to fight for the basic needs, right? So since as of March 2024, nearly $2 billion has been cut from New York City schools. We are undergoing a budget process right now. I actually believe right after our session, the New York City Council will be holding a hearing on the executive budget. So there is a proposal for more budget cuts and more to come, right? And so we understand that cutting the basic needs and the basic funding from our schools, especially after having just won a long-standing fight called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which was meant to fully fund our schools. So really only having about a year of full funding and then being faced with persistent budget cuts, really creates challenges for educating our young people, and then also imagining a school system that is more progressive and is more rooted in equity. So further on, related to student assignment policies, during the pandemic, middle school screened admissions, which New York Appleseed has really helped identify as one of the most kind of low-hanging fruits for the city, right? Like we're, spent many years determining the futures of 9 and 10-year-old kids based on their behavior as 9 and 10-year-old kids, right? And that really set up students to kind of go down a path for high school and middle school that ultimately, set them on a course for opportunities and privileges, or for really, not receiving access to the most sought after programs, right? And so during the pandemic, middle school screens were paused or eliminated for the time being, but that has, as Nyah said, that has been reinstated under this discretion of superintendents. And I think what we've always said is that superintendents, parents shouldn't have the option to choose segregation, right? And so what the current administration has done is given superintendents options to choose segregative measures and policies, and there are incentives to choose those measures that are, that are ill incentives, right? And so we understand that sometimes the system needs to actually make decisions around equity, and that's why we'd always advocated for the elimination of exclusionary admissions, aka screens in middle schools, right? So other changes to high school selective admissions, such as the removal of geographic priority in Manhattan, that again already created a reversal of many dangerous forms of segregation that were occurring, as we'll have to unfortunately say that there is talks about bringing those policies back. And ultimately what we understand is that reinstating policies that are known to have produce segregation will only produce more segregation. There really isn't a benefit for students across New York City or students in Manhattan schools. So we really need to reflect on why our current administration is deciding to re-implement policies that are known to cause exclusion and discrimination against Black and Brown students, low-income students, students with disabilities, English language learners, and other students who've been marginalized by our system. And, ultimately, many of you know that the shift away from these, hard-won progressive policies has really found clear support and alignment with, with local conservative politicians and parent groups who've found their affiliations with larger national right-wing groups like Moms for Liberty, right? And so there's a clear connection between the kind of move right, politically in New York City and around education policy, and the alignment and relationships built with local, national elected officials, parents, and right-wing anti-democracy and anti-equity groups. So, these challenges, I think, really shape where the work continues and where we need to continue pushing our work. So we're going to kind of transition over. So for folks who have been in the know about a few years ago, now it feels like a few years ago, but it was in 2017. And I think a big anchor of this report is really reflecting on the School Diversity Advisory Group, right? And this was a group that was convened in 2017 under former Mayor de Blasio, under former Chancellor Carmen Farina, as part of the city's first diversity plan, right? This committee, full transparency, I was a member of this committee when I was employed at New York Appleseed, but this comprised over 40 members. It included local and national experts on school diversity. It included parent leaders, educators, advocates, many students, and other community leaders to make sure that we had a comprehensive voice of representation to engage in these conversations. The SDAG also hosted 8 public town halls. We did one in every single borough to make sure that we could, hear as many voices around school diversity and equity as possible. And additionally, there were 2 youth town halls that were convened to make sure that youth voices were at the center of these conversations. And between 2017 and 2019, the SDAG had worked diligently to produce 2 reports that lay out nearly 100 recommendations on school enrollment, budget priorities, restorative justice practices, staff diversity, culturally responsive curriculum, and more. And right, so one more thing to note, right, is that the School Diversity Advisory Group provided these reports, which we really go into analyzing in our report, and offered recommendations that were some were adopted by the former administration, some were completely ignored. And what we think is really important is that the SDAG provided a really critical blueprint for school integration and equity for New York City, but also for other cities that has been kind of referenced across the country, right? And so whether or not many of these pieces of policy were implemented with fidelity, we still have these set of reports as an anchor and kind of a timestamp of where New York City has been, right? And so we really anchor our report on the School Diversity Advisory Group and some of the other mechanisms. So I'm going to pass it over to Rochelle from New York Appleseed to introduce herself and then kind of walk us through some of the process of analyzing the SDAG.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle. I am the Integrated Schools Project Coordinator for New York Appleseed. I work with Nyah. And Abram and I, my colleague Abram, he is working with Matt at EJ-ROC. The 2 of us were tasked with trying to find the implementation status for each SDAG goal and recommendation. So we used primarily 2 methods. We used the first one. We leaned on our network of relationships and coalition partners and DOE offices to collect this information on parent engagement, teacher demographics and recruitment, student enrollment, and more. And then the second method we used was to sift through the SDAG website, online databases, diversity accountability reports, and just any other sources of public information in order to find the status for each SDAG recommendation. And this took a lot of time because there is no central location to find this source of information. So we really had to dig through a lot of websites and reports just to find even one implementation status for one guideline. And then after we found all this data, we consolidated the data on a spreadsheet to determine which guidelines have either been completed, if they're still in progress, but have conditions or caveats, and which have been rejected or we found no progress at all. And then along with this, we have put in the evidence for the status implementation. Next slide, please. Okay. And after doing this data search, we came to 5 key findings. The first one being that, of course, there's a clear lack of central leadership and intention by the current administration to complete the outlined goals on a citywide scale, and specifically in the name of integrating schools. As I said before, Abram and I quickly realized that it wasn't going to be easy because there's no fixed location. Some schools and districts have completed some of the diversity goals, while others didn't even touch them, which leads to the second finding. Despite this lack of fixed standard or location, there is still more than half of the adopted goals that are in progress or complete. And this is largely due to the fact that a lot of smaller initiatives and programming led by bureaucrats, school leaders, organizations, communities, these groups of people are committed to educational equity and integration. For example, although this current administration hasn't prioritized culturally responsive, sustaining education, or CRSE in short, organizations like New York City Men Teach have continuously built a strong CRSE ecosystem by developing CRSE curriculum and racial literacy. So even though the top doesn't communicate it as priority, there are still groups of people out there who are putting in the work to intentionally diversify the system. The third finding is, of the goals marked as in progress or complete, many have not gone past the bare minimum of fulfilling their purpose, such as the goal of investing in programs and offerings that will attract more diverse families to schools that these families might not have considered before, while other goals are in danger of being completely reversed. The fourth key finding is many goals marked as in progress are intended for continuous advancement and would benefit from monitoring or tracking rather than being marked as completed and then set aside and forgotten. One example is the expanding of community schools initiatives and other models that connect schools to community-based organizations so that resources can be organized and leadership can be shared. This requires ongoing tracking so that academics, health and wellness, youth development, family engagement, all of these are integrated fully into each school and that the changes are intentional and consistent. And then lastly, leading to the final finding, since the adoption in 2019, SDAG 1 goals have not been revisited or acknowledged by the Adams administration. Many of the goals would benefit from an annual revision and editing tracking by the New York City Council.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. What we wanted to do was kind of transition from kind of taking the big, taking a larger view of, of New York City integration and then really kind of centered down on a district. And thankfully, our friends from WXY are here to help us really dig into the District 15 kind of policy and implementation. So I'm going to pass it over to our WXY crew to introduce themselves and then to kind of walk us through some of the findings from District 15, which I think it really helps exemplify what the level of work is required to really move integration and desegregation in a meaningful way. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Matt. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Natalie Kauz, and I'm here with my colleague Brawley, who will introduce herself in a second. And we're part of a team, as Matt mentioned, at WXY Studio, who's been working with specifically Community School District 15 in Brooklyn on an evaluation and reflection on the district-wide diversity plan that was put together there in 2017, 2018. Yeah, we're excited to also be nearing the release of a report. So we're going to share a sort of brief overview of what's to come. If you can go to the next slide. During this presentation, we'll talk through just a quick overview of the District 15 diversity plan, some of its features. We'll talk through our evaluation process, and then also share a selection of key findings, of which within the report, there's many more, but we wanted to share a few today. On the next slide, one more. So the District 15 diversity plan, we wanted to share just a quick timeline for folks who maybe are not familiar. So as part of the process in 2017, the DOE approved a community-based planning process to identify recommendations for how to meaningfully integrate District 15 middle schools specifically. After that process was approved, there was a year-long community engagement process that was stewarded by a working group. Throughout that year, there were 64 recommendations that came out of that plan that were then approved in 2018, September of 2018 by the DOE, a few of which there was like maybe 4 that were not approved, but the rest of the 64 were approved. And then in the school year 2019-2020 was the first cohort of 6th grade students that entered middle school under that new diversity plan. And then in 2022, October of 2022 was when when we first started to work with the District 15 team on an evaluation of that plan. And one thing to just highlight that, we've already talked about on this call, but really wanted to highlight that COVID-19 had a huge, as you all know, had a huge impact on schools and school communities. So that was definitely a big challenge as we started to move through an evaluation of this plan, is trying to parse out, impacts of the plan, impacts from COVID-19. So yeah, in constant conversation around that. But yeah, on the next slide, I'll talk through just quickly some specific features of the District 15 diversity plan that might be helpful for folks. One specific thing is that there was significant advocacy within the district before the plan was put together, both from parents, from school leadership. You heard earlier on the call folks talking about the diversity and admissions program, and that some of the principals within District 15 were already participating in that before this plan was put together. 2, there was large-scale public community engagement when the plan was put together with support from some key DOE staff. 3, they removed, another feature of the District 15 diversity plan is that they removed screens for middle schools for the middle school application process and set up a priority lottery for students in low-income families, multilingual learners, and students in temporary housing. And for that district, for District 15, it was 52% of seats were prioritized for those students because that was the district average of low-income students. And then the last piece on the next slide, I'll highlight as a part of the diversity plan, they put together 2 sets of recommendations, one that fell under the category of integrations, more policy specific. If you go to the next slide, there's a quick overview, great. And then there was also a section on inclusion recommendations that focused on what this working group and what, based out of all of the engagement, what folks were recommending would be needed for support in the classroom to support integrated classrooms. Great, and then the next slide, I'll talk through just a few objectives that guided our evaluation. We were really interested to learn impact specifically on school integration in general, and also wanting to understand additional impacts. So on transportation, overall enrollment, choice acceptance rates, school utilization. We wanted to understand academic outcomes within District 15, inclusive practices, feedback specifically on the implementation of the plan, and then also similarly to what Rochelle was sharing, to understand a little bit of progress updates on the 64 recommendations. On the next slide, I'll pass it over to my colleague Dare to talk us through a little bit of what our evaluation process looked like.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm Dare Brawley with WXY, and I've been working with Natalie on this evaluation. In terms of our approach to really is a unique opportunity to evaluate how the implementation and the ongoing outcomes of this integration plan has gone. And we had two major approaches to this evaluation, using both qualitative and quantitative methods in our work. We used, on the quantitative side, worked with New York City DOE, their Office of Research and Policy Evaluation, to get student level anonymized data to look at things like enrollment and socioeconomic composition of the district overall and individual schools, to look at middle school admissions choices being made by students. How many schools are students putting on their applications, and acceptance rates by admissions choice, looking at distance traveled to school, academic outcomes, suspensions, and teacher turnover. And really, with the same weight in our work on this evaluation, we use qualitative research methods through interviews, small group listening sessions, as well as a community survey to hear from folks in the District 15 community about their experiences in the district since the diversity plan was implemented. So we did interviews with district staff, as well as staff at DOE who were involved in various aspects of the implementation of the plan. Small group listening sessions, really we met with a range of different folks in the District 15 community, from guidance counselors, including elementary school guidance counselors, to get a sense of the experience of families before and after the plan and applying to middle school, with students and parents in the district, especially students and parents who fall into those priority and admissions categories, had a real focus on those. As well as district staff and principals and teachers and others in the school communities. We developed a community survey that was open to anyone in the District 15 community and was sent out by schools, by the district, and by community-based organizations in the area, that would allow for feedback from anyone in the community who wanted to weigh in. So at the next slide. I'll speak just briefly about a sort of really selection of key findings from the report, which, as Natalie mentioned, is coming out later this month. This is really just a kind of choice picks from those key findings, and there's many more in the report. But to kind of start off, looking at school integration, really stark. In the year before the District 15 plan was implemented, middle schools in the district ranked as the second most socioeconomically segregated amongst all school districts in New York City, using a dissimilarity index based on students and the proportion of students in the priority and admissions categories in schools in the district. That's the chart on the left. But by school year 22-23, the most recent year of data that we have available, District 15 middle schools ranked 19th out of 32 districts. So in other words, we see that the diversity plan really had a strong positive impact on integration in District 15 middle schools. In contrast, District 15 elementary schools remain the most socioeconomically segregated in New York City based on this same measure. This is a district with strong residential segregation. Zoned elementary schools really reflect that. So this sort of underscores the real positive impact that the plan has had on integrating schools at the middle school level in the district. Additional topics that we speak about in this section include how many choices students are making on their applications for middle schools, demographics across those schools as well. Next slide. Looking at additional impacts that the plan has had beyond just integration impacts, we see that the kind of overall, there has not been an increase overall in the average distance traveled to school for students in the district as a whole. And as well, there hasn't been a decline in enrollment beyond what New York City middle schools as a whole have seen during this period. And additionally, as you see here in the chart, after an initial decline, the proportion of students receiving one of their top 3 admissions choices for middle school is slightly higher now in school year 22-23 than it was before the District 15 plan. And at the next slide, I'll pass back to Natalie to speak about inclusive practices.
Great, thank you. And as Dare mentioned, these are just a selection of many, but wanted to highlight a few that we've heard across all of the engagement. Three here that we wanted to highlight. One is that many students who we spoke with as a part of this evaluation reported seeing the benefit of learning with peers who are different from themselves. Two, some school staff observed strides in student friendships across socioeconomic status and neighborhoods. And three is that many PTAs that we spoke to reported working towards inclusive practices, though many were interested in learning more about best practices around this and identifying further support. Additional topics that we talk through in this section in the full evaluation is we look at restorative justice, we look at suspensions across schools, we look at student and family feedback, and then also generally teacher training and curriculum. On the next slide, within the last section of our findings is around implementation, so feedback around implementation of the District 15 diversity plan. A few to highlight is that many emphasize concern around Title I funding policy in the context of District 15. Two schools lost Title I funding shortly before the District 15 diversity plan, and one middle school lost Title I funding since the plan, and two are nearing the funding cutoff. Additionally, many schools reflected that more individualized and school-specific support would have been beneficial in the implementation of a plan, sort of speaking to the challenges of setting up a district-wide plan and the specific context at each school. And additional topics we cover in this section of the evaluation is general reflections on implementation, middle school application process in general, transportation also related to the implementation of the plan, funding, and then also specifically as the plan relates to access to special programs and physical space across schools. On the next slide, one other thing to highlight that in speaking with lots of folks through engagement and also with district leadership, and to highlight this, the District 15 plan was a part of many different plans and projects that are happening within that have happened within District 15. And so in the years following the District 15 diversity plan, the district supported the work of two participatory action research projects, one focused on Sunset Park and one focused on Red Hook, Gowanus, Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, and Borum Hill. And these were facilitated by District 15 parents who are from those neighborhoods. And the projects highlighted a number of different family priorities. Two important ones included the importance of having a quality middle school close to home. Especially this came from the Red Hook community, and affinity language spaces in education. This came out of is one of the many that came out of the Sunset Park work. And just wanted to highlight, so two schools, PS 676, this is the elementary school in Red Hook, has transitioned into a middle school starting in school year 2022-23. And this fall, Global Innovators Academy, MS 428, is opening to the community. And this is a dual language, both Spanish and Mandarin middle school that's located in Sunset Park. Yeah, and then I will pass it back over to Dare to sort of close us out.
Super. Yeah, and as we mentioned, this is just a kind of high-level overview, a couple of key findings from a much longer report that's going to be released at the end of May. And there will also be a number of different release events in coordination with District 15 on this, so hope to see interested folks in those as well. And I will pass it back over to Matt.
Thank you all so much for giving us a look into the specifics around District 15, and we're all looking really forward to you all releasing your report, and we'll make sure we're sharing it out with our networks. So we're kind of nearing the kind of wrap up, and we know that there's a number of questions in the chat, or in the Q&A section, so we'll do our best to respond to the questions that that we are able to respond to. But we're, really thinking about where do we go from here, right? And so like really looking ahead, and I think as we kind of outline in our report, and as we kind of stated here, and I think as the report on District 15 emphasizes that this work and the work of desegregation and integration can't really be done unless we make commitments to implement, 21st century student assignment policies that are focused on increasing access, inclusivity, and work to repair the historic harm of segregation at all school levels, right? And I think you need to acknowledge that, this is a generational problem. And so under one administration, we really don't believe they're going to necessarily fix, 70 years, but really hundreds of years worth of policy and structural segregation and racism. But, I think the biggest, effort here is to not make it worse, right? And so what we understand is the current administration is actually making things worse by, re-implementing policies that we know to cause segregation. And so, this requires us adopting, accountability structures that are going to ensure that integration and other mechanisms of integration like restorative justice, like culturally responsive education are being implemented with fidelity. Part of why we wanted to uplift this report and the many recommendations that were supposedly adopted is that there is no clear mechanism for accountability on whether or not things are being implemented or not, right? And so, I think the last kind of piece before I pass it back to Nyah to talk about some of the next steps, right, is just thinking about like, there's been progress made, right? There's been a growth in diversity admissions policies. There's been the reduction of exclusionary and discriminatory admissions methods. And we need to sustain those, right? Not re-implement those. And I think that's where our report really, makes sure to uplift is that we have an administration that has an opportunity to make a dent in the functions of segregation in New York City. And at every turn, they've turned in the opposite direction by implementing policies that, again, we've known for years, will create more segregation and exclusion. And so, the emphasis, I think, from our report is we need some really clear and decisive leadership, and we need a commitment to, achieving the promise of Brown. So I'm going to pass to Nyah to share a couple more pieces of our report.
Awesome, thanks. And I think we always like to leave reports where we can collectively also call on folks on what we found to continue on the many different sort of inroads and pathways that we have to advancing integration. And I think a lot of that is there's sort of new research and ways to think about what the current demographics and policies, how they're intersecting with school segregation and the current movement in New York City. And I think number one thing that really is that has not popped up that needs more, I think, public light and research would be the impact of new arrivals on school segregation and integration measures, making sure that we are taking care of this community, making sure this community is not being siloed into just a certain amount of schools, making sure that they have the resources and supports that they need to also enjoy truly integrated schools and platforms. And then the other one is also thinking about new laws, such as the class size law and the implementation, ensuring that New York City within this phase-in is in compliance with the new class size caps. We have already started. New York Appleseed, we recently put out a report with the New York City Comptroller's Office to start the conversation on understanding that anything that has to do with enrollment is going to also have an impact on integration in the city. And so we offered one look into one possible solution, which is having inclusive and intentional school mergers that can foster integration in some places across the city. I also saw that someone had a question in there that was about, charter schools. And I think that's another instance of, there's research to be done on that side as well, and the impact that charter schools are having on segregation and integration in the city, something that we do not address in this report. But again, where do we go from here is another very prominent topic.
Awesome. So that's the end of our presentation. We will make some space and time to take more questions. I'm going to just pick up on, there's some of our contact information. We will share the slides with everyone who's attended, so you can kind of dig into some of the resources and follow up with us. I did want to mention, though, that as part of the SDAG, We did have a recommendation related to charter schools, but because the kind of governance structure is different for charter schools and traditional public schools, the way, and I may be like misstating the recommendation completely, but the idea was really to make sure that charter schools, one of the recommendations in the report too was that every district should be given resources to engage in a diversity planning process, similar to what District 15 and other districts have done. We said that as part of those processes, charter schools need to be brought into the fold, right? And so what we know that from national research on charter schools, this may be slightly different outside of New York City, but they tend to be more segregated than traditional public schools. Some of that is by intention, by priority. Outside of New York City, most charter schools are actually predominantly white enclaves of privilege. In New York City and other larger cities, they tend to be concentrating more low-income students of color. And so what we know is that there are a number of different charter schools across New York City who have a priority for integration and diversity, and we know that there are many others that don't, right? And so I think the larger point is that we need to, every publicly funded school needs to be brought into the process. And then I know there was another question about private schools, right? Again, similarly to the charter school system, but much more kind of disconnected, right? Like there isn't a governance system that New York City has over private schools. And so again, there are, many private schools do have kind of diversity, programs and efforts to bring in more diverse populations, but we don't have data in this report on the demographics of private schools and the relationship between their, kind of their enrollment policies and diversity policies and the traditional public school system. So that's just definitely another layer for us to engage in on more further research and further inquiry. So I'm going to pull the slides down and then we can all kind of answer some more of the questions as they're coming in. Okay. So there was a question here about linking to the report. The report will be released by Friday. The full report is being finalized by our graphic designer. So the content is all finished, and then we will have a spiffy version for you all to review later this week. But I will drop a link in the chat and to the question response to a city and state article that was just published about the report. So we do have an article that just came out of City and State kind of featuring the report, and then we will make sure as soon as the graphic designer is completed with this, we'll make sure to send the report to everyone who's attended this session. Just pulling up other questions.
Matt, do you want to take one of the first questions that came through was, do we know what kind of system we'd want to replace mayoral control? Would we want to return to what existed before or want to see a different system?
Giving me the easy questions. Yeah. So, I think the first kind of response is that we do not want to return to the pre-mayoral control system. I think nobody that I've talked to who's interested in an alternative system has proposed that we just go back to like what existed before. So I think that's just kind of one point to make, is that we want to make sure that whatever replaces the current system, if that's even in the works, actually is designed and created by New York City residents and students and parents, right? And so what many of us have called for is for the state to fund an independent commission led by parents, students, educators from New York City, so that we can really, engage in a full public engagement process to define what solutions look like and what our governance system should look like. I'll say that from my perspective, we have examples of transitions, like Chicago is currently transitioning away from a fully, a mayoral control system to a fully elected system. So I do think that we have some examples across the country about what it would look like to move towards a more democratically accountable system. Lastly, I'll just say we actually currently have a model, right? We have a model of elected leadership for our what's called the Panel for Educational Policy. Again, that panel doesn't actually have a significant governance structure or control over the school system, but there are elected parent leaders on that body. And so there is a mechanism we already have in place to elect parent leaders to governance systems. I think lastly, I'll just say is that we currently have students who serve on local community education councils. They serve on the Panel for Educational Policy. They're literally there as decoration and do not have a vote, and they don't have any power. And so I think one of the first incremental changes that we may want to think about is making sure that students have voting power on these bodies, or just remove them, right? Because if we're just going to have students there as decoration, it's really undermines and kind of disrespectful to their time. So I think many of us have advocated for young people who are currently in these positions, one, for that number of young people to be increased, because two students representing, you know, 1 million students is not fair. And for them to have actual voting power and some external support to engage in that. Thanks for the question. And I'm sorry, I don't have a clear, easy answer, but that's where many of us have landed.
I know there was a following question that said, do private schools have to follow these integration guidelines? If not, how do we ensure the schools that follow the diversity plan don't fall behind to those that don't, which would really be a big blow to the viability and longevity of the diversity project? I think that for this one, no, private schools don't have to follow the integration guidelines. They're their own entities, of which we've seen. What I would push back on is how do we ensure that schools that follow the diversity plan do not fall behind those that don't? I think one, I will cite that I think there are a lot of private schools that do have very robust diversity DEI initiatives and planning of their own. So I think that even though we know that we're doing this in public schools, it's not that private schools are not taking taking advantage or having their own diversity initiatives and thinking about the same questions that we are. I think the other thing that I'll just cite is like the reams and reams of social science research that shows the benefits, not only academically, but socio-emotionally, to attending a diverse school. So I think that it could be dangerous to make an assumption that folks that have a diversity plan in place would fall behind, knowing that we have the years of research that shows that folks that are attending integrated schools see a benefit from anywhere from, you know, increase in math to English language arts to graduation rates to you know, the benefiting list goes on and on, not to mention also the decreases in prejudice that we see and the social emotional benefits that come with that.
Yeah, thanks, Nyah. And I'm just going to add on to that. You know, I think one, we want to kind of, I think, push back a little bit on this idea that that we need to like continue to invest in programs and policies and belief systems that are rooted in like competitiveness and like competition, right? Like we actually have examples, like Nyah said, of the benefits of diverse schools across the country, and also in New York City. There are many schools who are already implementing policies and practices to make schools more inclusive. We know that students benefit from those schools, and we actually know that it reduces the amount of stress that is on parents, families, and students. I think District 15, although is a middle school example, but the reductions in stress and tension and anxiety that really was the impetus, right, for some of the District 15, like the District 15, some of that work was you know, one of the bodies of families were privileged white parents who were really prioritizing this, was even they understood that the current system was untenable, was overly stressful, overly competitive, and unnecessarily tedious, right? And so it ultimately undermined all parents' opportunities and all students' opportunities to access, you know, high quality schools, right? And so I think for us, the commitment has always been that, you know, we actually, one, need to make sure that our system is rooted in equity and the principles of equity. And so there should not be the decision for parents to make segregative choices. You know, in my opinion, there should not be the decision, the option to choose segregative policies and practices, because that is antithetical to a public system, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're holding accountable the elected leadership in this city to create a system that is beneficial and inclusive to all students, not just those who have most access to privilege or those who are most willing to participate in like the competitive kind of cutthroat kind of function of public education that ultimately undermines the public good of it.
I know we are at time, and I want to be cognizant of every folks' time. The hour ran by. If you can stay for one more minute of your lunch, I think we'll wrap up. But I think the perfect question to wrap up with, and again, we didn't answer all questions, but filtering through, I think someone asked about describing like the appetite among parents and educators to carry on integrating schools. And what are the barriers to doing this meaningfully? And I think that's a good wrap-up question that also we really try to end on a high note within the report, which is that the appetite is still strong. I think that the appetite is always strong. I think what we have seen from time and time again, from student movements in the 60s to now, and students that have been involved in the integration movement, from parents that were involved in the Diversity 15 plan, to people that we recently worked with and talked with at Appleseed from Arts and Letters 305 United, is that the appetite is always there. What is, I think, concerning for us and what we need to do with working urgently is ensuring that that appetite is being fed with investments from the political will and moral fortitude of city leadership. And I think that's what this report is really calling on, is that this understanding that this train has already left the station. Folks want integrated schools and communities. They talk about it and integration again in this holistic way. And when I say they want integrated schools and communities, they want resources, they want restorative justice, they want equity and excellence within their schools. And I think that that urgency is there at the community level. And what we continue to push at the community level is making sure that our city leadership is there or catches up, but also has an equal sense of urgency to make these things happen. I think that's the best way to wrap it up on a high note for this, is that the community stays strong with wanting to move this forward. And we hope that we can continue to pressure folks on the citywide level to continue to implement integrative and inclusive policies.
What a beautiful way to end that. Thank you so much, y'all, for staying a few minutes after for our conversation. And we're looking forward to sharing our full report with you later this week. We dropped the city and state article, which kind of goes into more detail. It also has a response from the administration. It's not a good response, but feel free to check it out. And please share the report once you get it, share the article, uplift the conversation. Please reach out to us with further questions. We'd love to be in conversation with you all. Want to just thank so much Nyah, Rochelle from New York Appleseed, our Roll Dogs. Just we do this work together, and so it's such a privilege to get to work with you all. And then our colleagues from WXY, who have been on the ground in District 15 for many years, alongside us and other community members, to make this work realistic. So shout out to my team, Abram. I see Annette here too. So thank you all for doing your amazing work. And continuing to like uplift the important work of integration, y'all. So have a good rest of your week, and we will see you all soon.